Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Just when I thought we were moving away from physical cash and physical cards, the world's getting excited about an Apple credit card and Coinbase crypto card. What's that all about? Although I must admit, I do love the idea of paying for a beer with a crypto card. I mean, it does sound quite cool. And maybe it will make crypto feel a lot more real for people. For example, imagine saying to someone that you know that Bitcoin that you said isn't real? Well, I've just bought you a beer and meal with it. Now, I might have to buy some crypto just to tick that one off my bucket list. But on this show, we explore how technology is transforming our world in places that you don't always expect. And yes, most tech sites and podcasts will focus on the new, exciting, shiny technology. But what about the technology that businesses are relying on each and every day? And that's something I want to focus on today's episode. Because a company called NetMotion Software accelerates business-critical applications, hybrid networks and mobile devices. And thousands of enterprises around the world depend on the company's solutions to deliver those application performance management, network optimization, adaptive policy control, remote access for their mobile forces, and so much more. Why do I care? Because I'm an IT guy at heart, and although I may have left the corporate workplace now, the IT blood still runs in these veins. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Canada so we can speak with Joel Windels from NetMotion Software. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Joel. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I run the marketing team at a company called NetMotion Software. And what my job is supposed to be is making sure that more people have heard of who we are and what we do. So it's great to be talking to you today, Neil.
Fantastic. Now, for people just tuning in, NetMotion Software is an enterprise mobility and mobile performance management company with over 3,000 customers scattered all over the world, including some pretty big names such as AT&T and US Foods. And I believe you've also got a customer satisfaction net promoter score of 91, which is phenomenal on its own. But can you just offer an overview for anyone tuning in and just hearing about you for the first time, the kind of problems that you're solving for your customers?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a marketer, it's always funny when people say, what category are you in? What Gartner market guide or magic quadrant are you in? And the problem with being an innovative company and the kind of company that does things no one else is really doing is that we're quite hard to describe what we do. So it's good that you asked it in the way you did. It's more about what problems we solve. And the problems we solve are all around remote working. Ultimately, more people are working outside the four walls of the office than ever before, but the user experience of doing so tends to be significantly worse. So rather than the super fast broadband and the Wi-Fi connection and the IT tools and the security that you have when you're actually working in the office, they just don't apply when you're on 3G or 4G or the Starbucks Wi-Fi. And so the products that we've built are all around enhancing that mobile experience from the employee's perspective, from the admin's perspective, squeezing more out of the networks, giving much more visibility and control into the company about what people are doing on their work-assigned devices. And so really it's about making mobility really work and letting people get on with their jobs.
Now, I recently interviewed Stacey Epstein from Zinc, who gave me the breathtaking stat that field service and deskless workers comprise of anything between 72 and 80% of the global workforce. Now, just put that figure into perspective, that's over 3 billion people. So with the growth of mobile workers, both in tech and non-tech jobs like airport baggage handlers and police officers and the like, I mean, what kind of issues have you seen arise with these workers that are forced to rely on Wi-Fi and cellular networks to actually go out there and do their jobs?
Well, the funny thing is that mobile, just like with any other technology, has been this big promise. And you see police forces and airlines invest heavily in digital transformation, or they say, hey, we're going to get rid of pen and paper and we're going to give everyone an iPhone, and police officers are going to be able to check the fingerprints of criminals in the street, so they don't have to go back to the headquarters or the police station to do all their paperwork, which sounds great. And they spend all this money and they really try and put some resource behind it. And then they try and roll it out. and they realize in Devon you get 1 bar of connectivity, and in London you constantly switch between the public Wi-Fi that's trapped on a captive portal. And so what's really letting down all of these projects is the networks. And like you say, I mean, that stat sounds incredible to me. I scarcely believe it, but I certainly believe the sentiment behind it, that people just do their job outside the office. They just do. But those networks are what holds everything back. You know, your IT stack, your laptop, your Skype call, everything that you do in a remote setting is dependent upon the network. And so whenever the network is important, that's where we come in. So for the Met Police, for example, it's a customer of ours. And for them, it's all about that network and making sure that their police officers aren't standing around trying to find signal. They're not standing around trying to log into captive portals. They're just getting on with police work, which is what their job is supposed to be.
It really is a fantastic stat, isn't it? I mean, when she was talking to me about it, I didn't believe it at first, but then as soon as she started reeling off the cable guy, the factory guy, the people that put your windows in, the builders, and the people that are keeping the country running, or the whole global economy running, they're not sat at a desk all day, probably like me and you.
Well, right. How much of your job are you doing, sat at a desk? You mentioned before to me the call that you were in Vegas. How much of your Vegas trip was behind a desk? That's my question.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about that.
Well, stays in Vegas.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I end up sharing everything that happens in Vegas, which is breaking every rule in the book. But for business leaders listening, I mean, what data security risks and problems are mobile workers and are their staff running into, and how can they actually avoid them?
Yes, it's funny that you say business leaders, and it actually tends to be business leaders we work with a lot of the time. So rather than your traditional network architect or your security expert internally, it's someone who just wants to get stuff done. And that might be a line of business. So that might be someone who is rolling out an app to, let's say, like a UPS and Royal Mail type customer that just wants it to work. And they don't want to be exposed to unnecessary risk. Quite often the security team is involved, but really mobile presents a whole new landscape in terms of risk. So let's take just one particular threat example, phishing. So when I say phishing, what do you think of? Nigerian princes, emails?
Yeah, I've got a few of them.
Yeah, me too. Maybe we're related somehow. I'm just waiting on that check to come through. Yeah. But, really, that is, people are quite well trained now. People know what to look for in an email. They look for the dodgy domain. They look for the bad English. They look for unexpected emails. But what they don't look for is a text message, right? They don't look for a WhatsApp message, a Skype message, a Tinder message, right? If you've been, I don't know if you're a Tinderer, but if you get matched with someone who looks like they're out of your league, there's a pretty good chance they are just a bot, And so what mobile does is present this whole new world for attackers to reach their targets in ways that the business is just not ready to combat. And so if I get a text that says it's from Halifax Bank and it tells me that my account's been compromised or there's an update that I need to log in on, I click on that link in the text. There's no way of me checking what Halifax's number is because I don't know Halifax's number. And that could be a fake landing page. And before you know it, I put in my credentials to sensitive data, PII, and if that's a company-owned device, they're on the hook. And so there's a whole bunch of businesses that are looking at emerging security trends like that and thinking we need a strategy in place. We need to know what's going on in mobile. Not knowing is certainly not an excuse anymore.
And of course, with the release of these sophisticated modern smartphones now, many have become extremely secure. So am I right in saying that the risks of getting your data stolen are moving to the network rather than the device itself? And if that is the case, can you expand on exactly how that happens?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad I used phishing as an example in the last question, actually, because you're right. iOS and Android are pretty damn secure. If you think about how you download stuff on a Windows, you can go to any website, download whatever program you want, and you install it. With the mobile ecosystems, you have to go to an app store owned by Google or Apple and download something that has been vetted and approved. And it's pretty hard to download anything else. You can, technically, but you oughtn't, and most people don't. And so the chances of getting malware on mobile is significantly smaller than it is on desktop, right? And so, don't believe the hype and the scare tactics that it's not. But really, it's the user that's suddenly more vulnerable, right? So just because the ecosystem is closed and just because the risk of malware and traditional hardcore OS exploits is lower, it doesn't mean that there isn't a threat. And that threat is all around the user. What happens when the user connects to an insecure or fake Wi-Fi hotspot, right? You don't have to compromise anything that iOS has got built in order to exploit a user. And the same goes with that phishing example that I just mentioned. Sending someone a WhatsApp message or a text pretending to be someone that you're not, you haven't hacked any systems. You're just beating users. And mobile is by far the most fertile environment there's ever been for exploiting users.
And of course, we're all anticipating now the 5G rollout, which many are expecting to cause a data explosion as machines and devices are all talking to each other as well as of ourselves. But can you tell me more about how this will actually help but not solve many of these issues?
So 5G is, it's like 4G before. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. I was at Mobile World Congress earlier this year, and it's funny because the industry hasn't even decided on what 5G is and isn't. And so I can't say that it's going to be the greatest thing of all time. I can't say it's going to be a waste of time. But based on how these technologies come out traditionally and how they tend to get adopted is, there'll be a bunch of perks. It will undoubtedly be better. But I can also guarantee you that as soon as the network improves, all of those applications, all of those services will start eating up more of it. I'll give you an example. So as networks got better and the 4G leap, lots of the mobile apps started to do things like autoplay video. So Facebook did autoplay video as soon as the networks were there to assume that a lot of users would be able to actually do that. Another one's Instagram stories. So, users could get faster connections, users could get increased bandwidth, but suddenly they're using a lot more data and need faster connections, so that the improvements visible to the user tend to be a lot less visible than it would seem on paper, if that makes sense. And from a security perspective, perhaps there's going to be some things that help, but I sincerely doubt that the answer to mobile security problems will be that 5G solves everything. Because in reality, people are still going to be using 4G. People are still going to be using public Wi-Fi, home Wi-Fi. They'll be out in the middle of nowhere with, some terrible connection. 5G is just not going to be everywhere. And even if it is, I just really doubt that it's the answer to our security problems.
But of course, Donald Trump says 6G. 6G is on its way.
I can't wait for 6G. I'm thinking about 7G myself, actually. I'm waiting for 7G.
Now, we have talked about a lot of problems here, but can you tell me a little bit more about how NetMotion helps their customers actually solve a lot of the problems we've talked about?
It depends on the use case, but we're all around helping organizations where they can't afford to compromise on mobile. And so if you take an airline, for example, I don't know the exact SLAs, but if they take longer than, say, 45 minutes to turn around that plane at an airport, they start getting some pretty significant fines. And the customers get annoyed because the flight's delayed. And so if you're equipping a baggage handler or someone below the wing with digital tools to be able to do their job better, you can't afford to be messing around, roaming between networks, trying to re-authenticate. And so the cost of having poor connectivity and no visibility into that network and no performance enhancements around that network can be, in the millions per year. And so when you're faced with a problem that big, it's so satisfying to be able to come in with a solution that says, do you know what, plug this in and it's going to fix everything. I know that sounds like a marketer speaking, but it really is. Okay, I was at our customer advisory board a couple of months ago, and it's amazing. I've never worked at a company where, you reeled off some of our NPS, which is 91, our renewal rate's 97%. Customers just genuinely think, wow, you put us on and you solve our problems and you make users happy, which is very rare for an IT product that the users actually want it on their devices.
Now, although I left my former IT life behind 2 years ago, I still remember just trying to be the guardian of the network and being the IT bad guys by stopping people bringing in all these devices. But in the end, of course, all those iPads ended up coming in. But I mean, can you tell me more about the growing trend now where companies are actually limiting those bring your own device policies and moving workers towards a mixture of corporate owned and personal devices? Is that something you're seeing a lot of?
So this is a really contentious issue. So I like this question because a lot of people say that BYD is the future. Lots of companies are investing in BYD. All of the EMM solutions, for example, are finding ways like containerization to support BYOD. But I just fundamentally believe that we've reached peak BYOD, and we have just entered an era where we're going to start seeing it diminish. I don't think it's going to go altogether. Like you said, it might be mixed fleets, it might be just a general reduction over time. But I think the best way to frame it is, would you, as a recovering IT manager, would you allow a user to choose whichever laptop they liked, and they can buy it from any website, can buy it from a Chinese website, they can buy it from Amazon, they can provision it themselves, so they download all the apps they want themselves, and they can work on whichever platform, whichever apps, whichever services they like to get their job.
Make it stop, Joe. I'm sweating here.
It's horrible. And you have no visibility into what they're doing and what they're downloading, no ability to authenticate, no ability to control should things go wrong, and remediation is still going to be your fault if it does. Yeah. I mean, and you're on the hook for the billing quite often. And so I just think the reason it happened is because mobile devices and smartphones were consumer devices before they were enterprise devices. And so you got people buying iPhones and starting to do work on them because they wanted to do mobile work. And so IT ended up with this problem where you're like, damn, our employees have just self-provisioned and shadow IT. So we're just going to have to come up with a BYO policy that supports that. But I think if you were to start from scratch today, there's very few companies that would decide to have that as their optimum setup.
Now, another topic we've got to tackle here, of course, is the topic of the issue of acceptable online activities at work. I mean, there's even the hashtag not suitable for work, isn't there? But people often feel...
I don't know what you've been browsing.
No, I had to block somebody once.
I see.
People often feel entitled to use social media, YouTube, dating apps, and so many other websites on their personal smartphones while they're at work, even though many of those applications are making them less productive and taking up company bandwidth. But if we flip that on its side, some companies are embracing these changes and getting their staff to help them with their social media presence. It's a real tough balance to get right. But how are you seeing companies and helping them manage that balance?
Totally. I mean, I actually used to work in social media tech and kind of trying to enable businesses to embrace social media in general. And so, like I mentioned earlier, NetMotion is all about enabling work. It's not about limiting and stopping people from doing things. And so what we do is we build the tools. It's totally down to the corporate culture of our customers to decide what to do with those tools. And so if you want to say social media is unacceptable, you're not allowed to do that, we have a very authoritarian approach to work, sure, you can block it. You can stop people using social media, just like you can today with a web gateway. The more, let's say, soft touch companies might say, listen, you can do whatever you like. We trust that, you're not going to mess around. But maybe during core work hours, 9 to 5, let's not use Tinder, for example, just to go back to that same instance. But after 5 p.m., you can do whatever you like on that phone. Another one might be, let's say, bomb making. Do you want your employees going to a bomb making website? Almost certainly not, right? And that's not an invasion of privacy. You can't, I want to be able to do whatever I like on my corporate assigned device. Yeah, you can go on Facebook, but we don't really want you looking up recipes for bombs. Yeah. But again, I can talk about culture again. If you work for a police force, you probably need access to some of those more extreme sites. So that example just illustrates why every company is kind of on them to decide what the policy is, what's acceptable use, and on us to be able to help them do that.
Well, we've covered so much ground today, but before I let you go, I've got to ask, if there's anybody listening that wants to find out more information about the exact kind of work that you do and how you're helping your clients, what's the best way of reaching you? And also maybe contacting a member of your team if they're just left with any other burning questions after listening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very accessible person. You stalked me on Twitter and found out where I used to live and what football team I support, which is obviously the most... so I'm at Linkyeah, Linkyeah. I'm always happy to help. Or, of course, you can go to our website, which is what most companies would do these days, which is netmotionsoftware.com. We'd love to hear from you.
And what was your mother's maiden name again, Joel?
Well, have you got some money for me to claim in an offshore bank account?
Now, before I let you go, I have got one more stat for you because you seem to like the other one. The other stat I learned a couple of days ago was 70% of the world's transaction revenue all touches an SAP system. Does that surprise you?
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, good for them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story today. I've really enjoyed having you on. I'd love to get you on again in the future and follow your journey. But more than anything, just big thank you for joining me. So thanks again, Joel.
Yeah, awesome. Appreciate that, Neil. See you later.
Maybe it's because I'm a former IT guy that knows the pain of supporting applications and networks. Today's episode really resonated with me, and Joel was just an all-round great guy I could have just spoke to for hours. But I love how NetMotion gives IT decision makers robust intelligence and control over those devices and applications and networks, not to be the bad guy or to be the bad IT guy, but to increase operational efficiency and end-user productivity. The fact that the company consistently receives an impressive customer satisfaction Net Promoter Score, NPS, of 91, significantly exceeding NPS averages in the technology and telecom industries, is impressive on its own. But I can't be the only IT guy here, past or present. So calling all IT professionals, it's time for you to share your expertise, pain and anything else you want to add to today's conversation. And you can do all that by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. And of course you can get me on Twitter at Neil C. Hughes. But enough of my IT rants for one day. Keep those messages coming in and I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning. So thanks for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.